I hope you brought your wings. Feathered wings, butterfly wings, bat wings, airplane wings, angel wings. All your beautiful aspirations are welcome here in this sacred place of possibility. Who among us hasn't dreamed of flying? Who hasn't seen the magical and transcendent nature in the very notion of escaping that stubbornest of laws that fuse feet to earth? How we long to be transformed. Today, we celebrate women who fly. And given my male identity, it would be fair to ask what my relationship is to the topic. That's fair. I offer 3 answers. The first is that I view my life as inextricably bound to the lives and the welfare of those who identify as women. My world has been shaped by women's struggles, including being raised by my mother, a divorced single woman, and growing up surrounded by my grandmother and my mom's 5 sisters. No brothers. As an adult, my world has been transformed by living and growing in relationship with my spouse and life partner, Betsy, and my amazing daughter and songbird, Meredith. My second answer is that my emerging ministry gives me the opportunity to pay it forward by nurturing the beloved women who call this church their spiritual home. I'm called to minister to those of all genders, and I'm called to work for the liberation of all, including myself. Repeating stories of liberation, including lifting up the voices of women, both ethereal and enfleshed, is how we get each other free. But the third reason I'm preaching this sermon is that I just fell in love with these riveting stories of winged goddesses and unflappable women who preached on the prairie. And I just wanted to share them with you. So let's take flight together. The birds will have the first word. When you go outside, look up into the cloudless or cloudy sky, and you may find red-tailed hawks soaring in large, smooth circles, their steady wings shimmering. In the presence of these majestic and magical creatures, it's easy to see how the ancients viewed bird flight as something sacred. They also viewed it as something fearsome. As raptors teach us, the powerful winged ones can also bring instant death to creatures that creep below, joining life and death, earth and sky. In her powerful and provocative book, Women Who Fly, Serinity Young takes her readers on a journey through time and space. Among these pages, we explore the glory days of the worship of aerial and celestial females who possessed the powers of life and death. From prehistoric times onward, humankind has created and revered flying supernatural women. You see, once upon a time, we humans thought of the earth and the sky as 2 separate realms. Desiring creatures that we are, we craved life in both worlds. And we fashioned rituals and myths that could transport us from earth to the upper realms. The phenomenon of flying females started as bird creatures. Women and goddesses held the key to transformation and could serve as guides for mortal men who longed to be reborn as trans-earthly beings. And these flying goddesses often shared a particular superpower: shape-shifting, or the ability to change one's bodily form. In other words, unlimited power over their own bodies. Imagine that. Swan maidens, witches and shamans, Valkyries, Dakinis, fairies, even Wonder Woman can change their appearance in dramatic and slippery ways. This allows them to breach boundaries between human and animal, between the divine and the carnal, and to escape bondage in the hierarchical world of men. Shapeshifters, Young writes, are unnerving because they can't be contained. By changing out of their human forms, shape-shifting women shatter gendered social conceptions as well as those of species. Imagine the poor man trying to catch him a beautiful swan maiden, only to have her slip through his fingers and fly away. This is chaos, he might say. Aren't women supposed to represent order? Aren't they supposed to sweep the dirt out of the cave or the hut or the house? Aren't they supposed to preserve the boundary between ordered human community and dirty, wild nature? The image of the winged woman responds, no. Airborne females did their best to cast off their shackles and break free from earthly limitations. Imagine the disruptive power of the witch who takes that broom of domestic drudgery and turns it into a source of freedom. Bring your wings. Bring your brooms. So here's Young's thesis in a nutshell. The history of humankind is the history of men originally worshiping the transcendent feminine, but then gradually, as patriarchy took hold, stopping at nothing to contain and control transgressive feminine powers and female bodies. But you still have to read the book. Now let's fly to ancient Greece. The goddess Athena is one of those airborne females who once flew freely until she was grounded by the patriarchy. So Young explains, Athena was originally an avian-inspired winged deity, along with the love goddess Aphrodite and the fertility goddess Artemis. Over time, these original bird forms morphed into more human shapes, originally retaining the wings, but later dropping them altogether. As patriarchy arose in ancient Greece, these feminine images of transcendence, fertility, life, and death were harnessed and controlled. Far from ancient reverence for avian females, the dominant narrative in Greek mythology came to be the slaughter and defeat of the monstrous feminine. Once the goddess of fertility, weaver of life and death, Athena had her wings clipped and was relegated to serving men in military battle. The erasure was nearly complete when they changed her origin story. In Athens, Athena was now said to have sprung not from birds, but from Zeus's body, eerily similar to Eve being created secondary from Adam's rib. Athena became masculinized and devoted to the destruction of female monsters. doing battle with the slain Medusa's head pictured on her chest and the defeated winged sphinx on her helmet. Once Medusa and the Sphinx were Athena's powerful flying sisters, now reduced to murderous monsters. And so began the patriarchal project of grounding women who dared to transcend earthly boundaries drawn by men. The patriarchy has changed tactics from age to age to contain female power. Ancient goddesses who fly, we will capture them. Women with the power of life and death, we will control their bodies. Women as inheritors of equal human rights, we will co-opt them as helpmeets. There's been an endless litany of excuses for the subjugation of women. Women don't possess enough heat. Their skulls are smaller. They are not equal to men, but complementary. Their realm is not the public sphere, but the private. Women's brains are just different. Women can't be trusted to make decisions about their own bodies. And this is my favorite. Women can't fly airplanes while menstruating. And on it goes. You all have your own stories. Yet, something there is in the feminine spirit that will not be controlled. And of course, there have been some men throughout history who have recognized this and worked as allies with women in their efforts to throw open doors and windows and throw open the locked cage doors. Today's would-be male allies can take inspiration from these stories too. Now let us fly from the mythical battlefields of ancient Greece to the real-life cornfields and prairies of the American Middle West. A slight change of scene. As we heard earlier in this service, today we are lifting up the stories of the Iowa Sisterhood, 21 ordained women who flew. Between 1880 and 1930, these ministers planted and led churches. They preached heretical, liberating theologies and tended the spiritual needs of their small-town communities. We are indebted to Cynthia Grant Tucker, who compiled the research in her book, Prophetic Sisterhood. Tucker's scholarship allows us to reclaim these stories and the names and faces who have nearly been forgotten. The era of the Iowa Sisterhood tells the story of how women will succeed when barriers are cleared. And it's a story of how the allyship of those who hold power, primarily men, is essential for creating space for this flourishing to happen. Ultimately, it's a story of how the work of liberation is never done, for liberation is a fragile thing while oppressive power structures endure. So here's the backdrop to the story. According to Reverend Lisa Friedman, a UU minister in Minneapolis, the Western Unitarian Conference was formed in 1850, which equates roughly to what we now call the Upper Midwest, and it was a way to expand Unitarianism on the frontier. Now, this is long before the merger with Universalists, which was 100 years later. After the Civil War, the white population of the area was growing quickly, and Iowa, in fact, tripled in population after the Civil War. Women had new jobs during the war and expanded their spheres. Not surprising, they were changed by their experiences and they didn't want to go back to their old lives. Many were writers and lecturers and activists. So Western women were eager to push the boundaries that held back their sisters in the East. But it would be an uphill struggle. Many said that women couldn't or shouldn't preach. Some were laughed out of seminaries, others were tolerated but not supported. Transgressing long-standing boundaries would require allies. The Reverend Jenkin Lloyd Jones assumed leadership of the Western Conference in 1875, thwarting the more Christian and Orthodox East, which included St. Louis at the time. Jones is one ally ancestor model for Unitarian men. Under Jones's leadership, the Western Unitarian Conference abandoned dogmatic tests of faith and opened pulpits to women, moving into uncharted territory. And make no mistake about it, the Iowa sisterhood was not simply replacing men with women. They were replacing the old order with a new kind of ministry. They flew, they shape-shifted, they transformed. And it struck terror in the hearts of the male-dominated American Unitarian Association back in Boston. So much so that Boston deprived the women of needed resources. But the sisterhood fought back. They withheld their contributions to Boston from their local offering plates. The ministries of the Iowa Sisterhood were not just about Sunday sermons, but holistic community ministry and mutual support. Tucker writes of the new shape of ministry that was required on the frontier. In the West especially, she writes, the urgent need was for all-around androgynous workers who were not just good pulpit providers, but also caring, attentive pastors throughout the week. Radical Unitarian congregants found themselves isolated theologically from their Orthodox neighbors, and they needed holistic care. It was hard to be Unitarian. The same down-to-earth versatility was essential for any successful ministry in the Western field, Tucker writes, and no one had shown this more clearly than the women with flourishing pastorates. It would seem that these flying women would need to take their brooms in hand to both sweep up the dirt and fly to new realms. It was hard to find ministers willing to do the hard work of planting churches and establishing community. Reverend Eleanor Gordon once derided the young male Harvard divinity graduates who declined to step up. "What is the matter with our younger ministers?" she wrote. "They do not look for a place where they may wrestle with superstition, ignorance, materialism, godlessness, but where there is a church built, where the work has been done, where everyone is saved, where all they have to do is write an essay once a week and perhaps lead a Browning club." As with the defeated aerial females of old, the patriarchy would soon reassert itself. After World War I, the Iowa Sisterhood all but disappeared as Unitarian leaders, along with the wider culture, succumbed to the movement toward a more manly ministry. And much of the rural populations served by the sisterhood began moving away to the growing cities. So what are the lessons to be learned? That women cannot be grounded for long and that allyship will be necessary as long as patriarchy endures. We have made tremendous progress in the Unitarian Universalist Association. Women are now the majority of UU ministers. Yes. And we're now about to say farewell this June to Susan Frederick Gray, the first woman to hold the office of UUA president, to be succeeded by another woman. Yes. I'm proud of the fact that we are ahead of the wider culture on the issue of women in leadership. Friends, we know woman power is not monstrous, but our wider culture still has not relinquished this fear, and until they do, female bodies and women's lives are still not safe. As you know, we are now going backwards when it comes to bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom. So what are we called to do? As we do this work, we are called to remember. To remember there was a time before patriarchy, that there are other ways of living outside of hierarchy, possession, and control. Let us remember that the cages of patriarchy are not natural, but constructed. And because women's rights are not separate from anti-racism and other anti-oppression work, let us always remember those women of color and trans women who carry a double burden. We are called to remember the good and hard work that so many women have done already, like the Iowa Sisterhood. They have shown us what is possible, and they remind us what clear blue sky looks like. And we are called to allyship, all of us. Recall the words of activist Fannie Lou Hamer, "Nobody's free until everybody's free." Bring your wings. We close with this special remembrance of the Iowa Sisterhood.
As Midwestern Unitarian Universalists, we light this candle of gratitude as we remember the pioneering women ministers in the later decades of the 19th century. We know them today as the Iowa Sisterhood. We invoke the spirit of their life-giving ministries, their care for weary souls on the prairies on the western frontier, and their resistance to patriarchal domination. We reclaim their legacies, and we write their stories on our hearts, for they are our own stories. We speak their names so that we may remember. Florence Buck, Mary Edith Colson, Caroline Julia Bartlett Crane, Adele Fuchs, Eleanor Elizabeth Gordon, Mary Hoffendahl Jenny Howe, Ida C. Hulton,
Mary L. Leggett, Rowena Morse Mann, Mila Tuppard Maynard, Marion E. Murdoch, Anna Jane Norris, Margaret Titus Olmsted, Estella Elizabeth Pagem.
Gertrude von Peltold, Helen Grace Putnam, Mary Augusta Safford, Eliza Tupper Wilkes, Helen Wilson, Amelia Murdoch Wing, Celia Parker Woolley.
Let us give thanks for all the ways they inspired future generations of spiritual leaders of all genders, both ordained and lay. Let us together remember in the deep down of our bones the time when women were birds. If you look, you may find that your wings are still there. Feathered again and ready to fly, may we sing and soar without constraint.